Time Capsules radio plays are based on 10 historical events of the Mornington Peninsula. These events date from 1803, with the establishment of the first colony of South Australia, and up to 1967, with the disappearance of one of Australia's Prime Ministers at an ocean beach. The character of Mel Lure takes the listener back in time, reporting and interviewing the main players as each event unfolds. Play number 1, The First Colony. On October the 9th, 1803, English ship HMS Calcutta, transporting settlers and convicts, entered Port Phillip, which was then named Port King. The ship arrived with its companion supply ship, HMS Ocean. They had been sent hastily by the English 6 months earlier in order to ensure settlement before the French. English Lieutenant Murray had claimed the bay over a year earlier. Due to the lack of fresh water, failing crops, and a rapid decline in social behaviour, the settlement in what is now called Sorrento only lasted 7 months.
Our attempts at agriculture are mostly a failure. Land cleared has left soils that are not suitable for crops. Some open lands have various results. It also seems that the seed bought by the military generally fails, whereas seed bought out privately has a reasonable chance of sprouting. All told, the village is dying.
Thus, Governor Collins sent a message on board the ship, the Ocean, which was heading to Port Jackson for whatever supplies they may gain.
Upon the Ocean's return on December 12, 1803, I received Governor King's agreement for the removal of the settlement to Van Diemen's Land. With this, a resolve of activity set in.
Play number 2, Ticonderoga. A large 3-masted clipper ship, Ticonderoga, left Liverpool, England on August 4, 1852, bringing British emigrants bound for Australia. At that time, the gold rush in Victoria attracted emigrants from all around the world. However, the passengers and crew's first sight of gold was in the form of a yellow flag, flown by the ship a week later, indicating that many of the ship's inhabitants were infectious. The Ticonderoga became known as the Fever Ship. In order to protect the people of Melbourne, the quarantine station was established at Port Nepean. By the time the Ticonderoga arrived at the site, many on board had died, and many were gravely ill.
It's November 1st, 1852, and it's 90 days since the ship departed Liverpool. 90 days that the passengers and crew had to tolerate this fevered, putrid vessel. The Ticonderoga is anchored off the heads of Port Phillip Bay, where she sits, unsure of where to go because of its infectious condition. Dr. Hunt, who had come down from Melbourne to help organise the growing quarantine station, described the conditions he first met when he boarded the Ticonderoga.
It was terrible, Miss Lure. The great mortality seems to have been occasioned by the crowded state of her decks and want of proper ventilation through the ship. This caused debility and sickness. Dirt and filth of the most loathsome description also accumulated, tainting the atmosphere and affecting everyone who came within its influence.
Play number 3, The Crashing of the Cheviot. During a stormy evening on the 19th of October 1887, the passenger steamer ship the SS Cheviot departed Melbourne with 23 passengers and 36 crew, bound for Sydney. The storm intensified after it left Port Phillip Heads. SS Cheviot's propellers hit rocks and the newly fitted out ship lost its steerage. The ship was thrown against rocks and tore apart. Through the brave actions of servicemen based at Port Nepean and others who were nearby at the time, 24 out of the 59 aboard were rescued in dangerous conditions in the dark. The cove herein was named Cheviot Bay, and decades later claimed the life of one of Australia's Prime Ministers, Harold Holt.
Hold on. Everyone, grab something, anything. We're going to hit.
Captain, we're stuck here. I don't think the ship will take much...
Right, Charlie, right. I knew this could happen. Best use that distress rocket now. I'm not sure she's going to hold together. Charlie, Go on! Righto, everyone. Someone's sure to see that. But we need to move. I reckon the ship's going to break up. Best have everyone aft. I think it has the greatest chance of holding up. It's pretty much wedged there.
I'm not sure. The slope.
Quickly, take my hand.
Fine.
Oh, gotcha. There you go. Now, miss, you two.
I can't. I'm scared.
There's no time to be scared, miss. Just take it.
Plane number 4, the footy team that drowned. On the 21st of May 1892, 15 members of the Mornington football team drowned at sea as they were returning from Mordialloc, having played the first social game for the year. Some who had sailed over with them earlier in the day made the fortuitous decision to return back home to Mornington by train, as was the common means of travel at the time between Mornington and Melbourne. Only 4 bodies were recovered. The magisterial inquest revealed very little of the cause of the tragedy. One family lost 3 sons. The owner of the boat and his son were also amongst the victims. There was an outpouring of grief from and for what was then a small seaside town. Funds were raised for a memorial which stands in place to this day in the township.
Little by little the wind freshened, and a choppy sea got up, all without a sign of the process. Little by little, impatience changed to anxiety, and anxiety changed to fear.
I couldn't go back to the pier and just wait, so I've decided to go to Mordialloc myself. I'll travel by buggy with my friend here, Mr. McClellan.
And so they left, but it wasn't long before they met up with Mr. Glover, who was on his way back to Mornington.
Mr. Glover, any luck?
No, Mr. Short. The process left as planned and there's been no hide nor hair of her since.
It's now 11 a.m. and I'm standing on crowded Mornington jetty.
Miss Lua, I can see that maybe something has been found. The Wanderer has stopped. I know not why. Unfortunately, even with the aid of these binoculars, I cannot make out what is being undertaken. I can see that a couple of other boats have now joined the Wanderer as well.
On the yacht The Wanderer, the man aloft was the one who first saw the process.
Captain, off the port bow, about 500 yards. It looks like a small part of a boat's bow. I think it's the underside of the bow.
The Wanderer immediately hauled her wind and came alongside. They found that the discovered hull was indeed that of the missing boat.
Plane number 5, the burning of Dramana. In early January 1939, the southern states of Australia were in the grip of an intense heatwave. Temperatures broke records and reached 45 degrees Celsius. Approximately 75% of the state was alight in the lead up to and during what became known tragically as the Black Friday bushfires. On Sunday, the 8th of January 1939, the sleepy seaside town of Dramana, home to 600 residents along with its holidaymakers, was ablaze by mid-afternoon. Driven by strong winds, fires burnt out most of the township. Eyewitnesses reported that flames leapt across Point Nepean Road, right up to the water's edge, driving people into the water for protection. Due to the brave efforts of the local fire brigade and their helpers, no human lives were lost. However, sadly, many lost their homes and businesses to the inferno.
This is Mel Lua reporting for Time Capsule. It's Sunday, January 8th, 1939, and Victoria and the southern states have been suffering through a massive heatwave that has broken most temperature records, reaching over 45 degrees Celsius.
We have an enormous fight on our hands. A wave of fire and smoke is now racing into the town. In places, it has almost reached the foreshore.
Oh, it's hard to watch. Practically all the camps along our part of the foreshore are on fire, including ours. We've gathered on the sand with as many possessions as we could grab, watching our camps burning to the ground.
Residents made frantic efforts to fight them, but had to retreat and leave their houses to burn. Several invalids were carried out to cars which were driven along streets in which houses were already blazing.
Play number 6, the first shot. Fort Nepean is infamous for firing the first Allied shots during both World War I and World War II. The first shot was fired at a German cargo ship, SS Pfalz, as it steamed out of Port Phillip on August 15, 1914. On board was an Australian, Captain Robinson, whose job was to guide the ship out through the heads of the bay. Despite being given warning shots, the German captain took some convincing to turn the ship around and return to Melbourne. The shot fired during World War II on the 4th of September 1939 was fired across the bow of an unidentified ship entering Port Phillip, which had failed to respond to a recognition signal. The ship was later identified as Australian freighter SS Waniora.
You must turn this boat around, Captain. That was the last warning shot. The Royal Australian Garrison Artillery only gives 2 warning shots. The next shot will sink us, all of us.
Nine! We must go on.
We're here on the bridge of the SS Pfalz, where the pilot, Captain Robinson, is trying to convince the ship's captain, William Kirkin, to turn his ship around.
We must telegraph the engine room. Full speed astern.
You have no right. We should be allowed back to our country. We must go full speed ahead.
We missed the signal flags.
We must go on.
Stop it, man. We'll be killed. The next shot will be aimed at us. Be sensible. Better to be alive than dead.
Better to be home than here. I'm not spending the rest of the war in prison camp.
So, Captain Kirkin, is it true that this is your maiden voyage with the Pfalz?
So I am a good captain.
Not if you have your first ship sunk. You'll be just be captain in a Davy Jones's locker.
What is it you say, Davy Jones?
It means the bottom of the sea. Dead at the bottom of the sea.
Sunk?
Play number 7, Arthur Seat crash. On Wednesday the 10th of August 1938, 5 Royal Air Force Avro Anson bombers flew from the RAAF base at Laverton to engage in a navigational reconnaissance around Port Phillip Bay. Deteriorating weather conditions meant the machines were recalled. Tragically, however, one bomber crashed into the side of Arthur Seat. 4 of the air surface men, in ages ranging from 22 to 28 years, died at the scene. Locals rendered their assistance. The sole survivor, turret gunner James Glover, aged 31 years, who had sustained multiple lacerations, was later questioned as part of the inquest. The coroner concluded that due to low cloud coverage of the mountain, the pilot was not aware that he was flying overland at the time, and therefore the collision was accidental. The crash caused much consternation around the nation, as it was the second RAAF air tragedy with multiple deaths that year. Consequently, the topic of air accident investigations was heatedly debated in federal parliament.
Did you see that?
A plane?
Yes. It just dipped below the fog.
Yeah, I saw it. Just for a few seconds.
I think it was heading for the mountain.
Members of the Air Accidents Investigation Committee arrived 3 hours after the disaster. I managed to speak to a Major Brown.
I don't know what else I can tell you, Miss Lure. You can see the calamity for yourself. The observation cabin, in which 4 men were seated, took the full force of the crash and was almost completely crushed. Instruments from the cabin, including the wireless equipment, were scattered more than 30 feet from the wreckage. The starboard engine was flung 20 feet in front after the plane struck the ground, and the port engine had been stopped by a tree about 10 feet to the rear of the cabin. Pieces of the wings hang in the treetops farther down the mountainside, and the 4 bodies that were found they'd been flung in the direct line of flight of the plane.
For the Labor Party's contention, the Labor Party's contention that the Air Accidents Investigation Committee should have, as one of its members, a person with magisterial experience. I have always held the view that these inquiries should be open to the public. Failing that, I consider that the presence of some person with cross-examination capacity other than from within the Department of Defence, within the Department of Defence would excite greater public confidence in the air accidents.
Play number 8, The Guringai Incident. During the evening of the 20th of November 1940, passenger ship MV Duntroon, bound for Sydney, dimmed its navigation lights in preparation for departing through the Port Phillip Heads. This was the practice during wartime outside of Port Phillip Bay in order to reduce the possibility of being sighted by the German enemy. At 8:38 p.m. near the Heads, in the bay, MV Duntroon hit a Royal Australian Navy vessel, a minesweeper, HMAS Guringai, sliced it in two, and the Guringai quickly sank. MV Duntroon fired distress rockets and lowered lifeboats, and locals from nearby Queenscliff joined the search for the passengers and crew. Sadly, there were no survivors from the Guringai. All 24 on board perished and only 6 bodies were recovered. The inquiry, whilst initially ascertaining that the captain of MV Duntroon was negligent, decided that the cause was inconclusive. A whitewash was the term used by many who followed the disaster. The sunken vessel was exploded as it was a danger to shipping, and its remnants remain a haven for an abundance of sea life to this day.
Port, 6 degrees, Mr. Main, just to be on the safe side.
Yes, sir. Captain, I think those lights, I think she's travelling across us. I just saw a red port navigation light about 1 point off the starboard bow.
What? Let me look. Bloody hell. Where the devil is she going? Sound the horn. Sound the bloody horn. Turn to port. Hard port. All engines. Stop. All engines. We might just be able to give her a glancing blow.
Captain?
Wait. No, bugger it. The engines aren't going to stop soon enough. Get ready to lower the lifeboats. We're going to hit. Hang on.
About to give some comments is Counsel for the Government, Dr.
Koppel for the Government, and thus owners of HMAS Guringai. Mr. Chairman, I'm just wanting to put on record contextual information surrounding the incident.
Go ahead, Dr. Koppel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was after completing a day of clearing mines that the HMAS Guringai required more stores and so headed to Queenscliff. Initially, she was anchored there, but the weather was up and a better location at Portsea was decided. Guringai proceeded to cross Port Phillip.
Play number 9, The Day We Lost Harold Holt. On Sunday the 17th of December 1967 at 12:15 p.m, the Prime Minister of Australia, Harold Holt, aged 59 years, disappeared never to be found while swimming off treacherous Cheviot Beach, Portsea. He and 4 friends had just watched a solo navigator sail into Port Phillip Bay. Mr. Holt loved to swim, snorkel and spearfish in the surf. His close friend, Mrs. Marjorie Gillespie, shared with the police that the doctor had recently told him to reduce these activities due to his injured shoulder. Witnesses attested that he had disappeared into the surf. However, conspiracy theories such as he was taken by the Chinese in a submarine or killed by the Vietnamese, as Australia was involved in the Vietnamese War, abounded. An inquest wasn't held, as coroners were then unable to investigate deaths when bodies weren't found. 38 years later, in 2005, 18 years after the law had been changed, one was held, concurring with one of the police inspectors that Mr. Holt's overconfidence in his swimming ability, combined with the treacherous seas, contributed to his death. The funeral was held in Melbourne. It was the largest collection of VIPs and heads of state from around the world ever assembled in Australia.
The date is Sunday the 17th of December 1967, and I'm standing on Cheviot Beach near Portsea, Victoria. Cheviot Beach leads out to the treacherous stretch of ocean that is Bass Strait. It's around 12:15 p.m. and the Prime Minister of Australia, Harold Holt, has just swam out into the water. He is a part of a group of friends who had earlier been at Point Nepean to watch solo circumnavigator Alec Rose pass through the Heads and into Port Phillip Bay. Holt was accompanied by his close friend, Marjorie Gillespie, with whom many suggest...
Several of our friends have spoken to him about the dangers of his love of the surf, including his press secretary, Tony Eggleton, who told him that he should be more careful with his love of snorkelling and spearfishing. After all, he is the Prime Minister.
And how did he react to that, Mrs. Gillespie?
Tony said that Mr. Holt smiled and asked him what he thought the odds are of a Prime Minister being drowned or taken by a shark. I also reminded him just the other day that his doctor had recently asked him that he shouldn't be overexerting himself and to cut back on tennis and swimming. He's just injured his shoulder.
Mr. Woods, what's happening?
My friends are racing back to Sereno to get our diving gear. I have a pair of binoculars, so I'm going to go to the cliff top and see if I can spot him.
Thus, they initiated what would become the largest search operation in Australian history. The 3 amateur divers began their underwater search around 1:30 p.m, about an hour after Mr. Holt was last seen. Mr. Woods, it seems that you are having difficulty with the search.
Yeah, it's the water. It's turbulent and dirty. It's difficult to see, especially with the undertow. We've just been pushed backwards and forwards and ultimately being dragged out to sea.
It was the largest collection of VIPs and heads of state ever assembled in Australia. Notable attendees included the tearful Lyndon Johnson, President of the United States, Harold Wilson, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, Keith Holyoake, the New Zealand Prime Minister, the Presidents of South Vietnam, South Korea, the Philippines. In fact, every Asian nation was represented by their President or Prime Minister.
Play number 10, The Quarantine Station. The Point Nepean Quarantine Station was officially opened in 1852 and operated until its closure in 1980. Greater attention to cleanliness, personal hygiene, and advances in treatments and vaccines reduced the threat of epidemic diseases by that time. The station's leper colony ran from 1885 to 1935, when the surviving patients were transferred to Coode Island. In its time, the quarantine station's flexibility allowed it to be ready not just for infections, but also ready to help the injured, such as the RAAF plane crashes into Arthur's Seat during World War II, or the wildfire that engulfed Dramana in 1939. Also, to the amazement of many, it was indeed used as a summer camp for a couple of years in the early 1900s. The Point Nepean Quarantine Station was a remarkable medical complex for its time. The constant redevelopment of the station reflected changes in medical knowledge about infection and the transmission of disease. For 127 years it dealt successfully with a collection of diseases, and so it successfully served as the primary quarantine station for Melbourne and the rest of southern Australia.
On the 3rd of August 1852, the fever ship the Ticonderoga arrived in the bay with reports of 100 deaths at sea and another 300 on board with fevers, both typhus and yellow. This caused an urgent increase of construction at the quarantine station, with the first buildings being under canvas, brushwood shelters, or in some of the lime burners' huts. The harbour master, Captain Charles Ferguson, inspected the site and its growing temporary shelters. He reported to Governor Latrobe.
I first saw that the Lysander ship, now anchored at the Heads, had been fitted up as a sanitarium for the worst cases, which at that time was about 150 persons. About 90 of the sick were in temporary tents near the lime kiln, and around 50 were in the houses formerly occupied by their owners.
Miss Lure, when we came on shore, we thought we'd be comfortably housed, and according to the doctor's account, with plenty of vegetables, milk, eggs and other niceties. We soon found that we had to lead a bush life. We had to live in temporary tents ever since we came here. We have to go and scrub, cut our wood and make regular gypsies' fire. We do have a very good supply of water from a well close by, but we're obliged to boil it, or else we'd have the dysentery.
The generally dismal character of the surroundings is small compensation for prolonged captivity, as the eye soon wearies of dense tea tree scrub, rugged coastline and limitless expanse of water. Nor is a visit to the burying ground or to the leper houses calculated to have a cheering effect. The leper colony stands a few hundred yards nearer to Point Lonsdale, opened in 1885.